Now, every state is different. So we're only going to focus on California. But if you have clients that are in other states and they're saying, hey, I want to buy a short-term rental or an Airbnb or whatever the case may be, VRBO in this state, just let them know that every state has its own rules in terms of what the definition of a short-term rental is. So it's really a state-by-state thing. California, the actual, I'm going to read you what the actual rule is. And the actual rule is a short-term rental in the state refers to any residential property or portion of a residential property that is rented to an individual or group for 30 consecutive days or less. So that is the actual California bill definition of a short-term rental, which an Airbnb or VRBO is a short-term rental. So in a nutshell, it's anytime you rent out a property or a portion of the property for 30 days or less. Okay, so if someone is renting the property for 31 days, it's not considered a short-term rental. Okay, it's 31 days or less. So obviously, pretty much every Airbnb transaction is a short-term rental because it's usually 1, 2, 3, 4 days, right? VRBO, things along those lines. So that is the actual definition of what a short-term rental is. And now that could also be considered a vacation rental. So this is short-term rentals, obviously Airbnb, VRBO, those are the most common terms, but any sort of vacation rental, is also considered a short-term rental. Okay, so you have to kind of remember that when somebody says they want to rent out their home, well, I don't want to Airbnb it. It's a vacation place. It's a resort place. Okay, but the rules apply. Just Airbnb happens to be the biggest name in the process. Okay, so that was considered a short-term rental. So then a couple things I found that I wanted to kind of just briefly go over. Now, I don't expect you to know all this information, but I'm just going to tell you a couple things just so you have a couple general ideas in terms of, let's say somebody wants to buy a property and use it for short-term rental business. How do you go about doing that? Do you just simply buy a property and start renting it out? Well, there's a little bit more to that. So in the state of California, if you want to operate the house as a short-term rental, again, now keep in mind, here's one of the important things. It's the whole house or a portion. So even if you're only renting out a bedroom or you're renting out the back house, right? An AUD type of thing, ADU type of thing, that's still considered part of this. The first thing you have to do in California is register your property with the appropriate state agencies. So it's not only essential, it's required to be in compliance with local codes. So you can't just buy a property and then tomorrow open it up for Airbnb. You actually have to register your property with the appropriate state agencies that it's going to be operated as a short-term rental. Okay. And you can go to, California websites and things like that to find the forms and stuff in order to register. But it has to be registered. They have to make it it's because it's being looked at as a business. Okay. Which it essentially is. It is a business. So if you're operating a business, in order to make the business legitimate, you have to go through certain registration processes. Okay. Now, in order to run the business, okay, it's again just like any other business. So when you register it, again, I don't expect you to know all this stuff, but I'm just kind of giving you some basic knowledge. It has to be registered as a corporation, an LLC, a partnership, whether it be limited, general, limited liability, or a sole proprietorship. So they do have to go through these steps of opening up some sort of business entity. Okay. So again, I don't expect you to know the details of it, but what I want you to kind of take from some of this is if you have a client who says, well, I want to buy this property and I'm going to use it as an Airbnb. Okay, great. Before you do that, do you know that you have to register the property? You have to register it as a business. You have to have a business license to be able to do this. Oh, no, I didn't know all that. Okay, well, make sure you're following the proper protocols. Just knowing that they have to do that can be of some value. Okay. Makes sense? Everybody kind of with me so far? Great. Okay. Perfect. All right. So that's just something that they have to do. Required documentation, couple basic requirements. This involves submitting the following documents to the Secretary of State for California, proposed name of the business and the articles of incorporation or incorporation if it's an LLC, or articles of an organization or incorporation if it's an LLC or corporation. Okay, so these things have to be done. You also have to file for permits and licenses. So what they have to do is they have to apply for the employment identification number from the IRS. And then they need to check the local requirements for your short-term rental business. So is this surprising to anyone that there's actually work that needs to go in to be able to run an Airbnb?
No, but I bet a lot of people, I mean, I just looked up rooms for rent in Huntington Beach.
Yep.
Just a room. And I was surprised at how many there are.
Yeah.
And I bet they don't do all this.
No. Well, I'll bet most people don't. I'll bet some people do, but some people don't. But anyways, this is just stuff for you to be able to let your client know that there are steps that they need to take. Now, to Josie's point, does everybody do this that's on Airbnb, VRBO? You could not convince me that they do. I don't care how you could be a hostage negotiator and you could not convince me that everyone follows these rules. But your job is just simply to lay, hey, there are rules out there in case you are interested in doing that. So that way you make sure that they're doing their due diligence in doing those kinds of things. Okay. And then you also need to make sure that they are talking with their accountants for tax implications of a short-term rental. Okay. So I'll give you an example. In the eyes of the United States government, your property can qualify as a short-term rental business if you rent out your property for a minimum of 14 calendar days each year. So somebody might think, well, I'm only, I live in the property, 11 months out of the year, but I rent it out for Christmas. So I only rent it out for, 15 days a year. Well, according to the IRS, if you rent it out for a minimum of 14 calendar days a year, it qualifies as a short-term rental business. Okay. So make sure that they're talking with their accountants about some of these things, even if they don't plan on doing it for a certain amount of time. And then there's certain expenses that they can deduct when it comes to their short-term rental business, which again, they can talk to their accountant about those things, repairs, maintenance, insurance premiums, taxes, all those other different things. Okay. So just make sure that they're talking to their accountant about what they're doing with a short-term rental business because they don't want to get hit with anything. Okay. And then there's also the transient occupancy tax, which again, I'm not going to get too detailed into that, but the point is there's things involved. There's things involved with this to get it set up the proper way in the state of California. But again, remember, it's the state of California. So if you have clients elsewhere, might be different rules and things along those lines. All right. Questions on any of that before we get into some specific city stuff? All right, very good. Okay, so let's get into some of the specific cities of which we might have some business in. So I'm not going to talk about, San Jose, San Francisco, stuff like that. Maybe you have clients up there, but we don't do, not really one of our marketplaces. So I'm going to focus mainly on some of the areas that we may work. Okay, so first of all, some general shared rules and regulations across California. So for the most part, almost every city has a couple similar rules. So we talked a little bit about one is the majority of cities require short-term rental businesses to register either or both their business and their properties with the city. Okay, usually there's fees for that, so they have to check with their city registration and fees. Okay, things along those lines. Now, there are some cities that restrict some property types by dwelling, and we'll talk about that. Location, occupant number, minimum number of stay, things along those lines. Just giving you a couple things that each city can give certain rules to. Things like that. All right, very good. So let's jump into a couple things. So I want to just start off the bat on some of the cities that you are not, so just some of the basic stuff on some of these cities and whether you are or you are not. So for example, Temecula, an area that we have an office and some business, according to the state rules, short-term rental properties are not allowed in the city of Temecula. Okay, city of Temecula prohibits short-term rentals within the city altogether. A short-term rental is defined as a dwelling unit shared in whole or in part for temporary occupancy for less than 30 consecutive days. This applies to both whole homes and rooms listed on platforms like Airbnb and VRBO. Violators who try to operate a Temecula short-term rental business illegally face a fine of $1,000 per day. Okay, so Temecula, an area that we have an office and we do business in, is an area that within the city, you are not allowed to do short-term rentals and could face a fine of $1,000 a day. Irvine, similar to Temecula, the city of Irvine prohibits short-term rentals within all residential zones, as well as within all other zoning districts in which residential uses are permitted or conditionally permitted. So some of these cities, I'm just reading the rule as it is. In a nutshell, Irvine also, you are not allowed to do short-term rentals. But here's what's interesting, like just to show you how you have to really know each city. Temecula defines a short-term rental as temporary occupancy for less than 30 consecutive days. Irvine is less than 31 consecutive days. So very similar, 30 versus 31, but I just wanted to give you an example of how each city could have its own separate rules and regulations. But Irvine, you're not allowed to have short-term rentals. Violations, again, are $1,000 per day for the city of Irvine. Long Beach, another area that we have an office and we do business. Okay. Similar to most of California, Long Beach defines a short-term rental as a dwelling unit of operator for 30 days or less. This excludes hotels, motels, things along those lines. So in Long Beach, a person cannot operate more than one short-term rental. So if somebody is already running a property that's an Airbnb or VRBO, they're not allowed to do another one. So keep that in mind. Okay, that's one of the rules in the city of Long Beach. Also, if you have a multi-unit property, the number of short-term rentals should not exceed the number of dwelling units. So unhosted stays in primary residences are limited to a total of 90 days per year. Okay, so you're only allowed in the city of Long Beach to do a short-term rental for 90 days a year. And then in Long Beach, this again is not something that you don't always need to know, but just that there are rules in Long Beach. You need to apply for a short-term rental registration by the city. There's a non-refundable application fee of $250. Registration, now here's the thing, registrations are valid for 1 year. So keep in mind, in the city of Long Beach, you have to renew your application every single year. So if you buy a property in Long Beach, you register as a short-term rental, 1 year from now, you got to do it again. You got to do it every year. And registrations are non-transferable. So let's say that you have a client who wants to buy a property in Long Beach that's currently being used as an Airbnb. It's non-transferable. So just because it's already being used as a short-term rental does not mean that you can start using it as a short-term rental with a new buyer. New buyer means new rules, new registration, new application, all those things. Okay. Now, in the city of Long Beach, there's a cap of 800 properties that can be registered for short-term rentals. So it's important that if they want to buy a property in the city of Long Beach, that they might want to check with the city beforehand on, are there even any registrations available? Now, this part and then the other thing in Long Beach is in a coastal zone, the number is limited to 350. Now, I don't know, I wasn't able really to find, now I'll be honest, I didn't spend a ton of time trying to figure this out, but I didn't find what is considered the coastal zone, like how far from the beach is considered coastal zone. But in the coastal zone of Long Beach, you're only allowed to have 350 registrations. Okay. So again, one of those cities that you or your client need to do some research on before you move ahead, because you don't want a client buying a property that they're going to do an Airbnb on, and then they go get an application and they say, oh, we're already capped out. And it's like, well, crap, I wish I'd have known that before. So there you go. Santa Ana used to have a ban on short-term rental properties that has now been lifted. Okay, so the city of Santa Ana had a ban on short-term rental properties, but has now been lifted, and they are allowed to do short-term rentals again. Okay, but they need to follow the same regulations, business licenses, all those other different things. Okay. All right, City of Los Angeles. Now, keep in mind with the City of Los Angeles, in terms of the City of Los Angeles rules, for those of you that don't know kind of how the City of Los Angeles is calculated, pretty much half of the areas in Los Angeles County are technically LA City. Okay, so the San Fernando Valley, for example, even though there's Encino and Sherman Oaks and all those other different things, is technically all Los Angeles City in terms of rules and regulations. Okay, Hollywood and Larchmont, Los Feliz, all those other different areas of the city are considered Los Angeles. And then you go down to Inglewood, Watts, like all those areas are technically considered Los Angeles City. Okay, so even though there's city names, they're all considered Los Angeles City. Whoever came up with these rules is stupid. And whoever has never changed that rule in Los Angeles is even dumber. But that's my stance. Vote for Robert Hertel 2024. Anyways, moving on. So I say that because Los Angeles City actually encompasses a lot. Okay, actually encompasses a lot. So I want to make sure that before you just kind of go, well, I don't really do any business in the city of Los Angeles, because you're thinking downtown LA. There's actually, you might be doing some different things. All right, so let's go into the city of Los Angeles. Okay, basic stuff. They have to register their property, right? So they have to do all that application, $89 application fee, all those things. Has to be renewed after every year, has to be renewed. Okay. So there you go. You need to, in order to get it, basic things, you need to provide a driver's license, insurance bill, pay stub, things like that, that you own the property, all those kinds of different things. There's different contracts that go into the city of Los Angeles. As you can imagine, it's a little more strict. So if they rent out the property, they need to have a signed affidavit from the landlord that approves the use of a space as a short-term rental. So they just need to make sure that they have the proper documentation. Okay, different things. So in terms of Los Angeles caps the number of nights eligible for a short-term rental to 120 days. So every year you can only rent out the property as a short-term rental for 120 days a year. Now that's actually kind of a lot because it's a third of the year. But let's say you have someone who wants to buy a property in the city of Los Angeles and they're going to use it as a short-term rental year round. It's not going to work. 120 calendar days is the most days that they can do a short-term rental. Okay. So just things to keep in mind. Okay. And then there's just all kinds of other different fees. Okay. If they want to do different things, $850, things like that. But the main rule for Los Angeles is that there's more registrations, there's more forms, and that the max they can do is 120 days on a calendar year. So the number of days in a calendar year is fairly important because I think a lot of people think they can just do this year round, and that's not always the deal. Okay. I didn't go over this in the city of Long Beach, but there is a capacity cap depending on the number of units in the building. We don't do a lot of commercial stuff, but if you do have someone that wants to buy like an apartment or like a multi-unit building, there's only a certain number of units that can be short-term rentals. So give you an example. On a 2 to 10 unit property, which I know 2 to 4 is residential, but on a 2 to 10 unit property, you can only have one of them be a short-term rental in the city of Long Beach. So I didn't go over that because it goes, then there's 11 to 50, 51 to 100, but there are certain rules on the capacity cap as well. All right, then moving down to the next one. Okay, San Diego. Hold on. Anybody here do business in San Diego? Okay. If you want to know the stuff in I was going to bring up San Diego because we have offices down there. San Diego is very complicated. So if you want to know the stuff about San Diego, let me know and I can go over it to you. It is by far the most complicated in California. So, but I will tell you, well, in San Francisco, I will tell you this though. If you do have clients looking in San Diego for short-term rentals, please do your due diligence because it is far more complicated in terms of the rules than some of the other cities that we talked about. All right, good stuff. All right, so then a couple other areas. So Beverly Hills is funny because there's no rule that you can't do short-term rentals, but it's almost like a gentleman's agreement. You don't do short-term rentals in Beverly Hills. So it's kind of funny. Like I was doing the research on this because Beverly Hills didn't have any rules, but I was being told, no, you can't do short-term rentals in Beverly Hills. I was like, oh, but I don't see it in the rule book. And then I did some more research and found that it's very much like yeah, you're not allowed to do that here type of thing. Malibu has certain policies. So Palm Springs, we do some business in Palm Springs. There are some different rules and regulations for Palm Springs. So there's a limit of 1 permit per person, meaning that again, if you own a short-term rental property, you're only allowed to own 1 in the city of Palm Springs. You're not allowed to own 2. Okay. You cannot have more than 32 separate bookings per year. So some cities, as we found out, do it you have a max amount of days Palm Springs does it, you have a max amount of bookings. So you're only allowed to do 32 bookings per year. So if everyone does 3 nights, that's 96 total nights. But if you have one person that only stays for 1 night, that's 1 booking. You only have 31 bookings left. Okay, so Palm Springs, you can only allowed to do 30 separate bookings. Okay, and then again, you have the permits. But it's funny, the permit fee changes per city. Palm Springs has a permit fee of $900 every year. Los Angeles was $850, so different types of things. Pasadena, couple basic things. If there's a multi-units, so again, 2 or more unit house, only one of them is allowed to be a short-term rental. So if you own a fourplex, if someone wants to buy a fourplex and use it all as short-term rentals, you can't do that. You're only allowed to use 1 unit. Okay. And again, 90 days max for the year in Pasadena. Things along those lines. And then here are some cities that also additional cities that have short-term rental bans. So Burbank, short-term rental ban. Calabasas, short-term rental ban. Hermosa Beach. What's interesting, Josie, is that Huntington Beach is technically you're not allowed to do short-term rentals. So it's funny that you found a bunch of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Manhattan Beach, Redondo Beach, all those areas are not allowed to have current bans of short-term rentals. Yep. So that would be the deal with that. All right, good. Questions
Hey,
on anything?
Robert, how about Marietta?
Marietta has no specific rules, so they just follow your basic state rules in terms of short-term rentals. And what I mean by basic state rules is you still have to file an application, you have to register the property. Other than that, you're free to go. So any city that I didn't name, you're pretty open to doing whatever you want. Okay, so if a city like Marietta, someone wants to buy a property for a short-term rental, there's no specific rules or regulations to Marietta, so they just have to follow the state guidelines. They register the property, they have to do all the things I talked about the first 5 minutes. They have to register it, they have to get the permits, they have to do all that stuff with the city. And then other than that, there's no specific rules and regulations. They can do it, they can rent it out every single day, they can rent it out for 10 days, they can do it whatever they want. So all the only ones that have unique things are the ones I covered. So like Temecula, you can't do it. Irvine, things like that. If I didn't name a city, it's either because it's in Northern California or Central California, so it doesn't really apply too much to us. Or if I didn't name it, then there's no additional rules and regulations. Other questions on what we went over today? Okay. So my main takeaway that I wanted everyone to get into this, because keep this in mind too, to the final note here on Marietta and things like that. These rules change all the time. That's why I mentioned Santa Ana, because Santa Ana was banned and then it removed the ban. So rules change all the time. So a city could be, I may not have mentioned a city today. I didn't mention anything about, Diamond Bar, for example. But, next month, Diamond Bar might say, you know what, we're fed up with these short-term rentals. We're gonna implement a law or regulation. That's really how all these regulations came into play, is these cities were just fed up with too many short-term rentals. So then certain rules and regulations came into play. So my main takeaway from this is that if you have a client who's looking to buy a property and wants to use it as a short-term rental, before they purchase it, do your due diligence, or have your client do their due diligence on what is allowed and not allowed within the city. So even if I didn't mention anything before they go buy a property in any, again, I'll just use Diamond Bar or Marietta as an example. Hold on. Nothing's been on these cities before, but before we go forward, let's just double check. These things change all the time. Or vice versa. If somebody says, I want to do an Airbnb, but I would love to do it in the city of Temecula, but Temecula doesn't allow it. Okay, well, let's double check. Let's see if maybe they lifted the ban or lightened the restrictions a little bit, things like that. So make sure that you're doing your due diligence before they start the search process, before they put in any offers, definitely before they sign a contract or anything like that. Do your due diligence. And then make sure as well that they at least know, hey, there are rules and regulations that you have to follow. And they can go to different websites and things like that to do that, to find that information. But it's not as easy as just, hey, no problem. Well, yeah, let's go find you a property and tomorrow you can rent it out. Like they have to do certain things. So if nothing else, hopefully you got the idea that there's more to it than just buying it and renting it. All right. All right. Any questions or anything else that we missed on this topic? All right. Very good. All right. Well, hopefully you got something out of this information. And if there's anything else I can help out with, I'm more than happy to do it. If I missed, or if there's any other cities or anything like, hey, I heard this about this city or whatever, send it to me. I'm happy to do the research on any particular cities to see if I find anything. So if you hear something that I didn't talk about or counters what I did talk about, let me know and I'll look it up. So like I said, sometimes these things change without us even knowing.
Thank you, Robert.
You're welcome. All right, everybody. Again, sorry for being late, but hopefully you got something out of that. Other than that, hope you have a great rest of your Thursday. And if you need me, I'm around.